You wake up to the sound of rain against your window. It has not stopped for 3 days. Somewhere on your phone, a flood warning glows red, and you feel a small ancient twist in your stomach. That twist is older than your language, older than your city, older than the very idea of a city. But the real answer to where that fear comes from is far stranger than a weather app, and it starts long before anyone alive today was born. Your ancestors did not survive one flood. They survived thousands of years of them. Slow floods that crept forward season after season. Sudden floods that arrived in a single terrifying night. Floods that swallowed entire coastlines, while people were still alive to watch it happen, still trying to grab a child, a tool, a fistful of grain before the water decided the matter for them. And somehow through all of it, your bloodline kept walking, kept building, kept telling the story afterward over and over, until the story became part of you. How to understand it? You have to go back further than you think. Not centuries, not even a few thousand years. You have to go back to the end of the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, when the planet was locked in ice thick enough to bury mountains. Glaciers taller than skyscrapers sat where quiet towns now stand. Sea levels sat more than 400 feet lower than they do today. Where you might spread a towel on a beach this summer, your ancestors were walking on solid, dry ground, hunting animals that no longer exist, raising children under an open sky that stretched over land, now buried beneath ocean. Then the ice began to melt. Not overnight. Not in one dramatic instant like a disaster film. It happened across thousands of years. But here is the part that should make your skin prickle. Within single human lifetimes, within a single grandmother's memory, the coastline itself could move. A hunting ground your grandfather walked as a boy could be underwater by the time you were his age. A valley where your family once planted the first seeds of a harvest could become a bay. Imagine trying to explain that to your children. Imagine trying to explain it to yourself. Standing on ground that used to belong to someone in your family and now belongs to the sea. Geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, working out of Columbia University, proposed something in the late 1990s that reads like myth, but rests on real sediment cores pulled from the seafloor and real geological data. They argued that around 7,600 years ago, rising Mediterranean waters breached a natural barrier near what is now Istanbul. The result in their reconstruction was not a gentle rise. It was a wall of water pouring into the Black Sea basin, fast enough to submerge entire valleys of farmland within months. People who had built homes there, planted crops there, buried their dead there, would have had to run. Some, according to this hypothesis, may not have made it out at all. Do you understand what that means for a person standing on that shore? It means watching the water come and having no word yet for flood insurance. No sandbags shipped in from another province. No emergency broadcast crackling through a radio. Just your legs, your children, and whatever you could carry on your back before the ground you were standing on simply stopped existing beneath your feet. The Black Sea was not an isolated case. Beneath the waves of the North Sea today lies a vanished world archaeologists now call Doggerland, a vast stretch of forests, rivers, and hunting grounds that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. For thousands of years, your ancestors walked across it freely, following herds, building camps along rivers that no longer appear on any chart. Fishing trawlers still occasionally drag up mammoth bones and ancient tools from waters where no human should ever have been able to stand. As the ice melted and the seas rose, Doggerland did not vanish in a single afternoon. It shrank, decade after decade, generation after generation, until the last high ground finally slipped beneath the tide. Entire communities would have watched their world narrow year by year into smaller and smaller islands before disappearing completely. Try to imagine growing old on a shrinking piece of land, watching the horizon creep closer with every passing season. And yet the story does not end there, because your ancestors did something remarkable in response. They remembered, deliberately, precisely. And they made sure the memory would outlive them across the world, in cultures that had no contact with one another, in places separated by oceans and mountain ranges and thousands of miles. Flood stories appear again and again. A great water rising without warning, a sign given to someone paying close attention. A vessel, a mountain, a chosen survivor carrying life forward into the next age. Mesopotamian tablets tell it. Hebrew scripture tells it. Hindu texts tell it. Indigenous oral traditions across the Americas and the Pacific Islands tell it, each in their own voice, their own gods, their own geography. For a long time, scholars treated this as coincidence, or as one culture slowly borrowing the tale from another across centuries of trade and contact. But a stranger, more unsettling explanation has been gaining ground. Patrick Nunn, a geographer at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia, has spent years studying Aboriginal oral traditions that describe coastlines no longer visible on any modern map. Working alongside linguist Nicholas Reed, Nunn documented stories passed down for generations, entirely through spoken word, describing islands once connected to the mainland by dry paths, bays that used to be forested valleys, and shorelines that used to sit kilometers further out to sea than they do now. When researchers compared these oral accounts to hard geological records of sea level rise following the last ice age, the details did not just loosely resemble each other. They matched. Precisely. Some of these stories, Nunn's research suggests, may be recording real events from more than 7,000 years ago, passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation, through hundreds of storytellers without writing, without maps, without a single detail being allowed to drift or fade. Your ancestors were not simply surviving the flood in the moment it happened. They were engineering a memory system built to outlast their own lifespans, strong enough to still be accurate 7,000 years later. Stop and consider how difficult that actually is. Try to remember a detail your own grandparent told you exactly as they said it, word for word, and you will likely struggle after only a few decades. Now imagine a story surviving 280 generations without losing its geographic accuracy. That is not casual memory. That is a deliberate cultural technology, refined and tested against the harshest possible penalty for failure. A community that forgot which hill flooded and which one did not might simply not survive to tell the next story at all. Only the accurate versions lived long enough to be passed on. In a very real sense, you are hearing the surviving edit of thousands of years of trial and error, filtered ruthlessly by consequence. Why should that matter to you, sitting here now, safe and dry? Because you inherited that system, whether you realized it or not. Every warning your grandparents gave you about staying away from a swollen riverbank. Every story your culture tells about a great deluge, sent to test or punish or renew the world. Every instinct that makes your chest tighten the moment you see water rising faster than it should. None of that is random noise in your nervous system. It is inherited memory, wearing the quiet disguise of instinct, still doing its job long after the danger that created it has technically passed. Here is where the story gets stranger still. Archaeologist Bruce Massey spent years arguing that some flood myths might trace back even further than the post-glacial melt, to a specific catastrophic event around 5,000 years ago, possibly a comet or asteroid, striking the ocean and triggering massive tsunamis across multiple continents at once. His hypothesis remains debated, even controversial, among scientists studying that period. But the underlying question it raises is not debated at all. Could a single generation's trauma really echo forward for thousands of years, quietly reshaping religion, reshaping architecture, reshaping the very way entire civilizations chose to build their lives? Because that is exactly what happened next. Look at where your ancestors chose to live once the water finally settled. Higher ground. Elevated settlements, cities built deliberately on hills and ridgelines, not because it was easier to haul water and stone uphill, but because the memory of the flood told them, in no uncertain terms, that low ground could betray you without warning. Look at the earliest large-scale cooperative structures humans ever built together. Irrigation channels. Levees packed by hand, season after season. Shared calendars developed specifically to track seasonal flooding along great rivers, like the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Entire early civilizations organized themselves, not around simple abundance, but around the disciplined management of water, before water could once again manage them. The flood did not only destroy. The flood built the blueprint for cooperation itself. Think about what that really means. Before the great floods reshaped the coastlines, small bands of your ancestors could survive largely alone, moving wherever the game moved, following the rhythm of the seasons, without needing much from strangers. But water does not care about your independence. A rising river does not pause to negotiate with one stubborn family at a time. To survive it, people had to warn each other. They had to build retaining walls together, watch the sky together, trust a stranger standing on the next ridge to raise the alarm instead of staying silent to protect their own harvest first. Some of the earliest recorded laws in human history, carved painstakingly into stone tablets in Mesopotamia, include specific rules about water rights, canal maintenance, and shared flood responsibility between neighbors. Civilization's first written contracts were, in part, flood contracts, drawn up by people who had learned the hard way what happens when no one agrees on who fixes the wall. Notice what that required of your ancestors psychologically. Cooperation on that scale does not happen naturally between strangers. It has to be built, argued over, tested, and eventually trusted. A farmer upstream had to believe that a farmer downstream, someone he might never meet, would maintain their shared section of canal instead of letting it collapse. A family on a ridge had to trust that the family on the next ridge would send a runner with a warning instead of quietly hoarding the news to save their own crop first. Every one of those small, fragile agreements, repeated across thousands of villages over thousands of years, is a brick in the foundation of what you now call society. Long before there were kings or written scripture, there was mud, water, and the desperate necessity of trusting your neighbor. The flood did not simply threaten your ancestors' lives. It quietly forced them to invent the very idea of community obligation. The ancestor of every tax, every emergency service, every neighborhood watch group operating in your world today. Does any of that sound familiar to you? Consider your own city for a moment. Somewhere in it, there is likely a low-lying district that floods first, every single time the storms grow severe, while the neighborhoods on higher ground stay dry and largely undisturbed. That pattern is not new. It is not a modern accident of poor city planning alone. It is the same ancient pattern your ancestors lived inside thousands of years ago, repeating itself on a smaller, quieter scale, in a language of drainage pipes and property values, instead of myths and mountaintops. The instinct to build upward, to move away from the water's edge when you finally have the means to do so, never actually left you. It only changed its clothing. It should, because you are still living inside that inheritance right now. Every time a government issues a flood warning and expects entire neighborhoods to evacuate together, instead of every household quietly fending for itself, you are watching a system your ancestors invented 10,000 years ago, still quietly running in the background of modern life. Every levee holding back a swollen river, every dam regulating a reservoir, every insurance policy protecting a home against rising water, is a direct descendant of the raw terror your ancestors felt watching their entire valley disappear beneath a lake that used to be a field they had planted with their own hands. And here is the twist you were probably not expecting. The flood may be one of the single greatest reasons your brain is capable of long, structured storytelling at all. Psychologists and anthropologists who study oral tradition have long noted something curious. The stories most likely to survive across generations, passed down accurately without drifting into fantasy, tend to be the ones carrying urgent survival information disguised as narrative. A flood story is not simply entertainment for a fireside evening. It is a warning system, wrapped carefully in the shape of a bedtime story, small enough for a child to carry, dramatic enough for that child to never forget it. It teaches the next generation, long before they can read, long before they can measure tide charts or check a weather app, exactly which signs to watch for. The sky changing color at the wrong hour, animals moving early, restless, unwilling to settle. A river rising faster on the third day than it did on the first. Your own capacity to sit still and listen closely to a long, dramatic story unfold from beginning to end. The same capacity keeping you watching a video like this one right now may be partly shaped by tens of thousands of years of ancestors who needed their children to remember one thing correctly, or risk not surviving long enough to have children of their own. Even the structure of the story itself was likely no accident. Notice how flood myths across unrelated cultures tend to follow the same shape. A quiet warning, easy to miss if you are not paying attention. A period of disbelief, where most people carry on with ordinary life. A sudden, overwhelming arrival of the water itself. And finally, a single survivor, or small group who listened early enough to prepare. That shape is not simply good storytelling by coincidence. It is a rehearsal. Children who heard that story 100 times before they ever faced real danger would recognize the pattern the moment the sky began to look wrong, the moment the animals grew restless, the moment the river rose an inch too fast on the wrong day. The story was not just a memory of the past. It was a training simulation for the future, run safely by a warm fire, long before it needed to be run for real. There is a modern mirror to all of this that you may already be living inside without naming it. Today, entire coastal communities from the Pacific Islands to low-lying river deltas are once again watching their shorelines shift, this time driven by melting ice at the poles instead of the end of an ancient glacial age. Families are being asked to consider moving inland, sometimes for the first time in generations, carrying with them the same impossible weight your ancestors once carried. What do you take? What do you leave behind? How do you explain to your children that the map they grew up trusting is no longer accurate? The scale is different. The timeline is different, but the emotional shape of the decision is exactly the same one your ancestors faced on the shores of the rising Black Sea, on the shrinking edges of Doggerland, standing in the mud with everything they owned strapped to their backs. So the next time you feel that small, familiar twist in your stomach at the sound of hard rain against a window, understand what it actually is. It is not irrational anxiety invented by a modern news cycle. It is not simply an overreaction to a red notification on a screen. It is a signal passed down an unbroken chain of survivors, stretching back past written history, past the pyramids, past agriculture itself, all the way to a single person standing on a hillside, watching their entire world quietly disappear beneath rising water, and deciding in that exact moment to remember it well enough that you, thousands of years later, would one day feel it too. You did not only inherit your ancestors' land, their language or the shape of their faces, you inherited their flood, and somewhere inside you, quiet and old and endlessly patient, it is still teaching you every single time the rain refuses to stop, exactly how to survive.